Good evening, friends. Welcome back to Karnataka ENT Hospital Innovative Masterclass 2020 series of programs. That is ENT Grand Rounds. This is sixth session of ENT Grand Rounds. This is going to be an unique program because we are going to deal with one of the most difficult, elusive problem for treatment. That is globus pharyngeus. Almost every ENT surgeon, they face this problem on day-to-day basis. We have a lot of cases and we are always at a loss when it comes to management concern. And to address this issue, we have two most distinguished, I would say,
Yeah.
well accomplished surgeons of our country, being as a speaker, Professor Dr. Satish Mehta from Jammu, all the way from up north, and moderator, Professor Dr. Achal Gulati from New Delhi. So I'm going to introduce Professor Achal Gulati, then he will introduce the speaker, and that is how we continue the program. Coming to Professor Achal Gulati, I don't know where to start, where to begin. I would like to summarize by saying, he's a great teacher and a visionary, a pioneer, a true leader, and able administrator. Right now, he is this thing, professor of excellence at Maulana Azad Medical College in New Delhi, and also a chairperson of UG committee of MCI. Okay, and just not these two committees, he is on many such committees, always leading. And as an able administrator, yeah, he was instrumental in putting up two major institutions of Delhi. That is one, Dr. BSA Medical College, followed by Govind GB Pant, Govind Balla Pant, GB Pant in short, Institute of Postgraduate Medicine and Research, premier institutes of Delhi under Delhi government, and he was the founder, director, as well as founder, principal of those two institutes. To say pioneer, see he marveled. I would say he changed the structure of entire DNB examination system and introduced and developed this OSCE model of evaluation of postgraduate examination, the DNB. And I'll tell you that is, I would say, a watershed moment in our DNB program in the country. And coming to the many organized and association, he has held at various positions, president, secretary, and whatnot. And as a teacher, just not in India, several institutes in India as well as abroad, he has been a guest speaker and on various committees of those institutions all over the world. And I'm going to post this is a sharp, brief resume which runs in 2 pages on the chat area. I think every junior colleague he should listen to this. He should read this so that this should become our goal post in our life. What we want to become in our life, this should be the goal post. I would encourage. With this, I welcome Professor Achal Gulati on this program and make this program even more prestigious and introduce the speaker and conduct the program. Most welcome, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Prahlad. Well, I think I came to know myself today from you. It's been a real pleasure being over here. I thank Prahlad, you very sincerely for taking this initiative of taking medical education to nook and corner, not only in India, but the world over. You said that you have the listeners from the Middle East, from the Gulf, from UK, from Europe. And believe you me, Prahlad, I think you've done a great job onto that. The Karnataka ENT hospitals has really been brought on the board of the national programs from Chitradurga to all over. Thank you, Prahlad. In everybody's life, as a clinician, as a person in ENT, you do keep on coming across many issues, and especially they dog you when you do not know what to do. When you do not understand what the patient says. Patient comes and says, I have a choking sensation. I have a foreign body sensation. I have a lunch, I have a lump in my throat. All these things, when they come across, you really do not know how to go about it because you are at a loss. And then when you don't have a etiology for it, a known etiology for it, when you don't know what to do, when you don't think what to do, that's the time when people like Satish Mehta come forward and say, look, I have an issue which can be solved. And what is this issue? This is the issue what he's going to talk about on globus pharyngeus. Dr. Satish Mehta, he looks very innocent. But believe me, he is one of the sharpest people I have ever come across. In my life, when I joined my career as ENT as a senior resident, the first resident I had in my life was Satish Mehta. And he was one person, even at that time, who, let me tell you, I did not have to tell him what to do. I used to look at him, raise my eyebrow, and Satish used to say, "Sir, it will be done by today evening." He could read minds just like he reads the diagnosis today, just like he reads the ENT as a subject today. Even though it's been so long since he passed out, he joined, I think in 84, he joined ENT. Since that time, whenever I have talked to him, Satish has always been up to date in his knowledge. Currently, Professor of ENT at the Acharya Sri Chandra College of Medical Sciences at Jammu. He also is the consultant, senior consultant and director at the Satish Mehta Clinic in Jammu. And, you know, as a surgeon, as a teacher, as a person, as a friend, as an individual, he comes across with flying colors at every level. You know, in community medicine, we had heard of multi-purpose health worker. Here we have a multi-purpose ENT, not a worker, but an ENT all-rounder. You talk about otology, you talk about head and neck surgery, you talk about endoscopic sinus surgery, you talk about laryngology, and Satish Mehta has it in him to talk about any topic. And to deal with this difficult topic of globus pharyngeus, which started its history as globus hystericus, or even much before that, this topic, which has so many wide aspersions in the day-to-day management and in the day-to-day looking into, there's no better person than Satish to talk on this common platform, on this common disease syndrome complex, symptom complex, disease complex, howsoever he may explain it to you in the next 40 minutes. Please feel free to put your questions on the chat box, and at the end of Dr. Satish Mehta's talk, we shall take each one of the questions individually and answer them combined, and Satish will answer everything. I know I may not be able to answer because Satish is a much more better answerer than me, but we'll combine, we shall be able to sort out all your problems. And with that, I hand you over to Dr. Satish Mehta. And before that, I again want to thank Prahlad for making this happen. Over to you, Satish.
Yeah, you can share your presentation, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good evening to everyone. Am I audible?
You are audible, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Achal, for nice words of introduction. But at the outset, I appreciate efforts and sincere hard work of Dr. Prahlad, who is conducting these CMEs for a pretty long time and making the education reach everybody's doorstep. It does not benefit only the students, but it benefits even the faculty member. That is how you learn. If you have to teach, definitely you have to learn. Are you getting my screen?
We are waiting, sir.
Okay, just hold on. Just wait.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Just hold on.
Yeah, there you are.
Yes. Just a minute. It will take 1 minute.
Yeah. Instead of Zoom, you have to share the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
Yes, we are just on opening that PowerPoint presentation only.
Yeah.
Is it now visible?
No,
Not
Satish, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just hold.
Are you signing in from two devices?
Yes. Are you getting it now?
Yeah, that's
Perfect, sir.
Is it fine now?
Yeah, that's perfect. Very nice.
Perfect. Right. So I was just talking that Prahlad has taken a very good initiative, and I really am emotional about it And whenever and whatever time he calls me, I will be there to support him throughout. So that's my promise, Prahlad. So
Thank you so
you have
much.
given an introduction about Dr. Achal, but you don't know the other aspect of Dr. Achal.
No, I
So
did
I'm
not
just-
know your relationships went so long back, honestly.
Yeah. I welcome Dr. Achal Gulati as a moderator.
Yeah.
And nobody knows he has an excellent oratory skills,
Yes,
which you will witness this oratory skill today,
yes, sir.
right? And he has been my teacher, my guide and friend. Whenever you call him, there is a response, and there is always a positive response. And my journey as a junior resident has been made very smooth and pleasant just because of him. So with these few introductory words and my regards to my teacher, Dr. Achal, and appreciation for Prahlad, I start with the topic. First of all, I give instructions and request to every participant. Please do ask liberally any questions, whatever minor question, whatever a major question, difficult, easy, so that we have an interactive session. It should not be one way, right? So we continue. The topic I have chosen is intentional because with the onset of the pandemic COVID, I have seen suddenly the tremendous increase in the percentage of patients coming with globus pharyngeus because of the panic. And this panic can be seen written on the faces of the patients as well as on the faces of attendants who are coming with. So this is a persistent, a recurrent and intermittent problem of feeling of a lump in the throat without any pain, but it's very annoying and very distressing. So you can see the main picture. There is a female patient. She's holding her throat and she is almost choking because of the panic, not choking literally because of some breathlessness. Definition wise, it's a persistent sensation of a lump in the throat, which is not painful, but is annoying and very distressing. The normal incidence is 4 to 5% of ENT OPD, but in this pandemic COVID time, the incidence is almost 5 times increased, at least in my OPD. And I think same must be felt by other clinicians as well. Going to the history, the first case of globus pharyngeus, this is not a new term coined by us. It's a long ago, 2005 years ago by Hippocrates. So he was the first to coin this term globus pharyngeus. Then in 1707, John Purcell was another person who labeled it as a globus hystericus because majority of his patients were females and they were in the menopausal age group. So that is why he coined the term hystericus, hysteria associated with that because of hormonal changes. But in the final decision in 1968, Malcolmson coined the term globus pharyngeus. So we are back to what Hippocrates was telling us. So you can see how intelligent and sharp Hippocrates was. This is a list of causes which are probable. It's very difficult to pinpoint the diagnosis because etiology is unknown. So there are no standard investigations, no standard treatment. So it varies from case to case. So you have to make a customized treatment. Before that, history should be taken in detail and thorough clinical examination along with endoscopic examination. These are the 3 things which are very important to rule out any mass lesions because majority of the patients, you know, is a psychogenic. But before labeling a psychogenic, you have to be thorough in your workup of a patient that it is not a mass lesion which you are missing, and another clinician makes a diagnosis and then you feel very sorry. Sorry in front of patient, sorry in front of your own ego. So the main causes of pharyngeal inflammatory disorders, this I will discuss in detail. So I will just make a passing reference. GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, another thing which needs to be discussed in detail. Abnormal upper esophageal sphincter. So this is another thing which I'll discuss in detail. Thyroid disorders, because the location of thyroid is in the lower part of the neck and that is where the patient says, I'm getting choking. A big cervical osteophytes, especially with the advancing age, and thinning of the prevertebral and the superior constrictor and middle constrictor and inferior constrictor muscles with the advancing age. Foreign bodies, lodged in the paraglottic space. I have seen a patient of PJ itself, patient presenting with hoarseness of voice. 4 years ago, there he gives a history of chicken bone, very small, thin chicken bone. And we got a X-ray done. There was a doubtful shadow. And then we got a CT scan done. There was a small, thin chicken bone lying in the paraglottic space. So moment we removed it, the patient felt all right, but the vocal cord paralysis persisted, which needed thyroplasty later on. Anemia is another disorder which causes Plummer-Vinson syndrome. Anomaly of epiglottis, that is, instead of anteverted, which is a normal position, you have a retroverted epiglottis. Elongated stylar process is another thing which can give you a sensation of obstruction in the upper part of the throat. Vocal cord lesion, especially Rinke's edema, a massive edema, gives you a choking sensation at the same time, obstruction feeling in the throat. Then rare things do happen, abnormality of cuneiform and corniculate cartilages. In the form of floppy cartilages, they're vibrating up and down and gives a feeling of sensation as if something is moving and something is blocking. Cricoarytenoid dysfunction, and most common it is seen in patients of rheumatoid arthritis. As a part of rheumatoid arthritis, this joint can also be involved, and you have a fixation of this joint because of which the patient feels something odd in the lower part of the throat. Tumors of hypopharynx and tumors of supraglottis, they give a similar sensation of blockage. And patients say throat blockage does not complain of any hoarseness, then you definitely have to diagnose with the help of a indirect laryngoscopy or fiber optic laryngoscopy. Then there's another group of patients who do not produce saliva, maybe a Sjogren syndrome, or maybe because of post-radiotherapy, which must have everybody ENT has seen. Post-radiotherapy, dry throat, so you are unable to swallow unless you take a sip of water. They also contribute to one of the groups of globus pharyngeus. Now coming to the common thing occurs commonly, so we'll discuss those things first. Pharyngitis, acute pharyngitis, you have a granulation, inflammation, swollen up mucosa, it gives a feeling as something is stuck up. So this is simply seen on examination, history is short, so it's very, very overt. The diagnosis is very well made only on just examination and history. Tonsillitis, maybe palatine tonsillitis, or even a lingual tonsilite hypertrophy. Lingual tonsils are more likely to give globus feeling because they are attached to the tongue base and the vallicular region. That is where the patient feels that something is choking up, and if they are so big, like you have a associated epiglottitis, then you feel a potato voice. That means if you've taken a hot samosa and then you cannot produce the voice, that is what is the hot potato voice. Epiglottitis, lingual tonsillitis. Then there's another group of patients who says sinusitis with postnasal drip. The postnasal drip continuously coming, that helps the patient to diagnose, because one moment you depress the tongue, you can see the secretions coming down, mucopus, and then you can see the swollen up mucosa also, and then patient does give a history of nasal blockage, postnasal secretions. These are the simple inflammatory conditions which can be treated, and we are treating, everybody is treating efficiently with the help of anti-inflammatory, antibiotics, anti-allergic, gargles, and hygiene. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, it's a syndrome, it's a disorder which is being shared by both gastroenterologist and ENT person. So you have to share that diagnosis by means of investigation. Also, you must discuss with the concerned gastroenterologist, because he gives you much more better finding as far as esophagoscopy is concerned. As far as lower end of the esophagus is concerned, is there associated lax lower end of the esophagus, the lower sphincter, and the incidence of complaints in the form of blockage of throat is very, very high in gastroesophageal reflux disease. 23 to 68%, such big is a variation in number. Diagnosis is most commonly in clinical grounds. If the patient is willing for endoscopy first sitting, it's good. If not, you can give a trial and call for the second sitting, because many a time patient does not agree for endoscopy because of invasive procedure and because of discomfort it induces. So upper endoscopy is diagnostic in 90% of the cases, but sometimes you get a normal endoscopy, but the patient has symptoms. Then there's a role of ambulatory acid probe test, measurement of pH, but this you have only one center in one region because it's a costly equipment and you have to refer to that center to get all the patient investigated thoroughly so that you don't miss 10% of cases of GERD which are not diagnosed on endoscopy. And then while doing laryngoscopy, you can see in the picture also, you can see a congested larynx, you can see a small thickening of the vocal cords, you can see even subglottic nodule formation, edema of the arytenoids, swollen arytenoids. These are the findings which an ENT person must share with the gastroenterologist so that we work in together in tandem with other person. Esophageal manometry is to measure the pressures in the esophagus that is usually raised. Then barium meal study, swallow study, which delineates the mucosal irregularities, any external pressure from the arch of aorta, bronchus can be also delineated on barium meal study, which may be missed on endoscopic. So this is a GERD, it's a common diagnosis. Majority of the patients fall in this category, and that is why we are routinely giving PPIs for a pretty long time. And if the patient does not get good response and you are sure that patient does not have absolute dysphagia, persistent dysphagia, then you can delay the endoscopy in the second visit. Management of GERD, pharmacological agents, antacid to neutralize acute pain, but they remember antacids are helpful as a supportive treatment. It's not curative because they do not let the epithelium of the stomach and the esophagus heal. There you need a H2 receptor blockers and proton pump inhibitors. The drugs already, I think, known to everybody, famotidine, ranitidine, cimetidine. There are recent literature against the ranitidine because of some carcinogenic effect. So that point has to be taken because patients usually read Google and then they come to you. So you have to be very, very cautious. You have to a step ahead of them, then only they will be convinced. Then there are patients who will not respond to this medical treatment or pharmacological treatment. Then surgery in the form of fundoplication. Then you have a transoral or cervical or laparoscopic myotomies or LINX device. LINX device is a band which just closes the lower end of the esophagus, where it does not let the reflux occur from the stomach into the esophagus and into the oropharynx. Now coming to the upper esophageal sphincter and esophageal web, you can see these are the sphincters on the right side. You can see the upper part, superior constrictor, then middle constrictor, then salpingopharyngeus muscle, and the lower constrictor, that is thyropharyngeus muscle, and inferior constrictor muscle. What is the basic physiology, basic pathology in case of upper esophageal sphincter dysfunction? There is an abnormal relaxation. While the food touches the base of tongue, there's a normal thing, that normal physiology is the upper esophageal sphincter get relaxed. And once it is relaxed, you can swallow very easily. But in these patients, maybe because of stress, maybe because of there is a hyperactivity of these nerve endings at the level of the motor end plates. Because of this hyperactivity, there is a spasm of the upper esophageal sphincter. So instead of relaxation, it is contracting. So patient definitely feels that the food is getting choked here. So, but it is not a dysphagia. If you take the history in a particular way, or does it occur every time? He will say no. Does it occur to every food? No. Is it occur to only solids? No. It can occur to solids at time to liquids also. So history is quite suggestive that this patient falls in a category of upper esophageal sphincter disorder. Then you can see the Plummer-Vinson syndrome. This is a classical picture of a patient who has a severe anemia for a pretty long time, web formation. And this is easily visible even with your fiber optic endoscope, fiber optic laryngoscope. This can go up to cricopharynx. So then you can identify. Below this, definitely you have to take an esophagoscope. Now you have a available transnasal esophagoscope. It's much comfortable for the patient. Patients who gag a lot, they cannot tolerate oral esophagoscope. So this is another alternative, although a little costly equipment costing around 8 to 9 lakhs. So this is, I was telling you, upper esophageal dysfunction. symptom, dysphagia to solids and liquid, just repetition. You can have a modified barium swallow study. Modified means you have to ask the patient to keep barium hold up at the level of the cricopharynx. It's a difficult thing, but patients, once instructed properly, can do it. Manometry, then you need definitely probes and electrodes. It's a costly equipment again. One center in one region will be sufficient. Treatment is in the form of botulinum injections. Definitely they destroy the nerve endings, but it needs a repetition after every 5 to 6 months. Then dilatation with bougies of upper esophageal sphincter, it does help, but it's again a recurrent. And best option is if the patient is persisting with the symptom and the problem is nagging, cricopharyngeal myotomy. There are both routes are available, endoscopic as well as transcervical. We were trained in transcervical, so we are doing that. Thyroid disorders, thyroid disease, because thyroid location is at the junction of the neck and the chest. So it's at the level of the cricoid ring and below. And you can have a nodules, especially in the posterior part of the thyroid, which are not visible on clinical examination, neither visible on asking the patient to swallow. The best simple investigation is ultrasound of the neck and thyroid gland. It's so sensitive. It's better than even CT scan. It picks up even 3 millimeter, 2 millimeter nodules. So there are patients who have this disease underlying because of presenting as a globus, and I have operated 2 cases like this, and they are relieved after that. Cervical osteophytes, big osteophytes, degenerative changes, and then associated, because this occurs in usually old age, you have an associated thinning of the muscles also. So there are 2 components working together. So diagnosis is very simple. Simple X-ray cervical spine lateral view gives you diagnosis. Foreign body, I've already given you periform sinus and paraglottic space and upper end of the esophagus. You can have an impacted foreign body for years together because they go into submucosal and muscular plane and they remain embedded there until the patient gets infection and then gets the symptoms. And then they came with a history of this, that, oh, I do remember that there was some foreign body. I have seen even a denture presenting in the esophageal wall. After 5 years, patient got infection and then presented to us. Elongated styloid process, although they don't reach up to the lower end, but patient does have a symptoms obstruction in the upper part of the throat. And this is a calcification of stylohyoid ligament, and easily diagnosis. Only on palpation you can diagnose. If you palpate the stylohyoid area from external surface under the mandible in the direction of the infraauricular region, you can feel the bone in majority of the patients. Otherwise, you can have a simple X-ray called AP view. This is a image showing you 3D reconstruction, so as to give you better concept that what styloid looks like. Vocal cord lesions, especially the massive lesion in the form of Rinke's edema, a big vocal polyp, patient has hoarseness. In addition to hoarseness, patient say, I have a feeling of obstruction. Then abnormalities of laryngeal cartilage. I have already just given an introduction that abnormal corniculate cuneiform, they become very floppy. Even I have seen while doing an endoscopy, fiber optic laryngoscopy, abnormality of the eustachian tube, torus tuberis, in a patient from Ladakh. They have a very wide nasopharynx. It was a floppy torus tuberis, which was giving floppy sounds, the tinnitus into the ears. So you can have similarly a abnormality of the corniculate and cuneiform cartilages. Then in newborn, you can have a cyst presentation. Then subluxation or dislocated arytenoid cartilage, which can occur after a hasty or jerky intubations, difficult intubation patients, or trauma, patient reporting after so many years once the joint get fixity. Then you have a cricoarytenoid joint fixation. This is a part of rheumatoid arthritis. Same complex, like you have a involvement of other joints. So similarly, you have a joint, this joint also gets involved. The tumors are hypopharynx and supraglottic larynx. So this is one thing which should be seriously looking into every patient. You must imagine that every patient has a tumor, and then you rule out this. Then you will never fail in life. Investigations in journal for all these patients. Once the patient comes up, what investigation you should do? Minimum. Best is to do fiber optic examination after doing indirect laryngoscopy or 70-degree laryngoscopy, whatever facility you have. All these are equivalent, but definitely fiber optic examination gives you an edge, because if the patient is gagging and does not allow you to do 70-degree or 90-degree laryngoscopy, you can pass it through the nose and patient can lie down comfortably, and you can examine each nook and corner of nasopharynx, even oropharynx and the laryngopharynx and the larynx, even up to the cricopharynx. And here I will like to mention one experience of a patient. He was a doctor, anesthetist from Kanpur. He came to attend a conference in Jammu, and then he said, I have some problem in the throat, constant irritation. I said, no problem, I will have a look into your laryngopharynx region. And while I was introducing fiber optic laryngoscope through the nose, and I found a big thorn wall cyst in the nasopharynx. And there was a little bit discharge also coming from that. That was the only positive finding. I said, you have this thorn wall cyst. There is nothing in the larynx and the laryngopharynx. So this can give you a sensation of blockage in the lower part of throat, because it's all through the superior laryngeal nerve, your pharyngeal plexus. The sensation can travel down to the lower part of the throat also. So this is the biggest advantage of fiber optic examination. Otherwise, that nasopharynx is a hidden box. There are so many patients who come with diseases in this hidden box. Patient you must have seen with postnasal bleed, anterior nasal bleed, harboring tumors in the nasopharynx. Then simple relevant investigation, X-ray cervical spine, gives you much more information. I remember the acronym THACO, taught by Dr. Achal only. T stands for tumor, H for hematoma, A for abscess, C for cyst, and O for edema. So that means any of the lesions which gives you width of nasopharynx prevertebral tissue more than 3/4 of a width of C6 vertebral body is a positive sign to look for any tumor, edema, abscess, cyst. You can have a lesion in the cervical spine in the form of tuberculosis, Caries spine presenting an abscess, a cyst in the vertebra presenting here, and then you can have hematoma after an injury or patient is on anticoagulant. So these all the things are there. X-ray paranasal sinuses to diagnose if there is an associated sinusitis. Skull AP view for styloid process, simple. One X-ray gives you both the styloid process in one film. Barium meal swallow is a relevant investigation to see any mucosal irregularity. Manometric study, I will always tell you, one center in each region. It's a costly thing. Ultrasound neck is a simple investigation, especially to diagnose thyroid, even parathyroid lesions, even any other hidden lesion in the tracheoesophageal groove. You can have a big lymph node which is deep, neck is thick, short, you are not able to palpate. So there are difficult patients. There definitely the small, simple investigation is available in every nook and corner, and then it is very helpful. Coming to the treatment, globus patients are difficult to treat because they are difficult to diagnose. Etiology is unknown. Antidepressants, don't give straightway patient antidepressants. Always think of organic lesion. I'm emphasizing again and again, although you may find 70% patient with a psychogenic problem, but still 30% can be missed. So for those 30%, you have to see each of the 100% patient as a organic lesion. Anemia, CBC simple, give you an idea, iron levels, you can give a injectable iron, patient recovers very fast with that. Counseling and reassurance is the first. These two are very important words. The patient is distressed, attendant is more distressed because patient is there with the attendant all the time at home. So this you have to take care, you have to educate both the patient. Then there is cognitive behavioral therapy. If you establish a diagnosis that is a psychogenic, then you definitely need the help of a psychotherapist also. Take home message, very simple. Thorough clinical examination is must. A detailed history. History gives you many a times complete diagnosis like absolute dysphagia. Then you have to think at the same time patient not be in an electrolyte imbalance. Absolute dysphagia. So immediately patient need IV alimentation with correction of potassium, chloride, and sodium. This part is an first aid treatment. This must come into your mind. Relevant investigations, simple investigation. Always start with simple investigation. X-rays, in-house endoscopy, which every ENT specialist has right now, and ultrasound. Then go for a, those patients hardly require 0.5% will require a higher investigation. But final message is rule out all the organic causes before labeling as psychogenic. Thank you very much for patient listening. Please give your questions to Dr. Achal Gulati.
Thank you, Satish. It was a lovely, concise presentation, as concise as you ever are for always. Satish, there are a lot of questions coming in, but one thing I just want to ask one thing. Globus and dysphagia, are they one and the same thing, or they're slightly different thing in between them?
Yes, that is what I'm telling you. Take a detailed history. If the patient is so specific that it is dysphagia, then there's no problem. Then it has to be taken as a patient of dysphagia. Globus is slightly different because globus, it's not a consistent history. It's not all the time. It is coming and going, and history is pretty long, and patient looks anxious, and patient has at time history to the swallowing of solid, sometimes a liquid. But dysphagia is different, but you have to differentiate on a history taking.
Yeah. So Satish, one of the questions which is coming in is what to do with chronic pharyngitis with globus, which is not responding to amoxicillin clavulanic acid for a period of 3 weeks.
So there could be a coexisting infection, chronic pharyngitis. There may be bacteria which are harbored in the submucosal plane, and that is, I prefer such patient rather than giving 3 weeks, give only 1 week. Patient is not responding, rather in the first sitting only, try to take swab, throat swab for culture and sensitivity in every patient. That will definitely help you. In my clinical setup, I have shifted for such patient to injectable. And I tell you, although amikacin, when I learned, it was taught to be a gram negative mainly. But literature is full of this, and I have seen many reports, and I have of my own experience of getting culture and sensitivity. All the patients are coming sensitive to amikacin, and they're responding just with 3 shots of amikacin, and that too a little on the underside, 500 milligram OD, 3 days. Those resistant patients, they are responding. Advantage is one, it is parenteral. So you don't have to depend on absorption. So bioavailability is 100%. That could be one of the reasons for responsible, the response to the amikacin, not to the amoxiclav. Then amoxiclav is used by RMPs also. So use the reserve drugs like clindamycin, like clarithromycin. These are relatively less used drugs in the periphery or at the RMP levels.
Yeah, so just as a corollary to that, I again come back to my the original bearing. Is globus a diagnosis or is it a symptom complex?
If you see, it is basically symptom complex. You have to find there are multiple causes. It's not a diagnosis. If you label globus, then it's a dumping diagnosis. Your mind will stop working. So you just write a diagnosis. You are not getting a diagnosis in the first sitting. Globus under investigation.
Yeah. So I think that's a very valid point, that globus is not a diagnosis per se. It is a collection of symptoms which is there, for which if you cannot find a particular cause, if you are reaching a particular cause, then you would term it as a globus. Because the question of amoxicillin clavulanic acid would come in case I have found out a infective disease process over there. But in case there is no disease process, and it is, let us say, if you're looking at something like gastroesophageal reflux disease or something of that sort, then whether you give amoxiclav for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, it's still not going to have a management issue over there. It's still not going to improve till you have actually hit the root cause of GERD. So, like what Dr. Satish said, that you have to try to focus out on what the diagnosis is. Now, Satish, I'll just ask you one more thing, that we have a symptom complex which is there. We label it as globus. But are there any warning symptoms, some red flags, what you would like to flag for everybody to target as to when you should suddenly be more wary and careful of just, rather than just attributing it to a benign situation like globus?
Yes, yes. I always say, take whosoever patient comes, is safe having a tumor underneath. So then you will never miss. So that means you can subject this examination of fiber optic laryngoscopy or 90-degree laryngoscopy for every patient. Seeing nasopharynx is equally important, because many a time you can get a sensation through the pharyngeal plexus into the lower part of the larynx and the pharynx, where the disease may be sitting up in the nasopharynx. It's a hidden box. So that is why I prefer fiber optic laryngoscopy over 90-degree laryngoscopy in every patient. And it's more comfortable for the patient also.
Yeah. So, this is one of the situations where, while I'm trying to reach a diagnosis, like Satish said, that you have globus under investigation. So this is one of the situations where probably the trial medicine with the anti-GRD could be warranted. But keep one thing in mind. I think all those from PGI who studied under Dr. Mehra, he always had one very nice sentence to say. It is better to be pessimistic and be proved wrong rather than be optimistic and then be proved wrong. What he wanted to say was, I don't mind doing 2 more investigations to rule out a malignancy, even though if the chance is less. But if I've managed to catch one malignancy, my purpose as an ENT surgeon is served. So we have to be very careful in before we really rule it out as a benign disease, we must rule out certain other things. So for that, probably pain in the neck or throat pain, weight loss, abrupt onset, pain, choking, difficulty in swallowing, food regurgitation, muscle weakness, palpable visible mass, and any symptoms which are progressive or not being managed by conservative therapy, these must put up a red flag in your mind and you must investigate it further down. Satish, there's one question as to why do a fiber optic laryngoscopy, why is it preferred over a 70 degrees rigid or a 0-degree nasal endoscope? Would you like to comment upon that?
Yes, yes. There are advantages both the things. Advantage is 70 or 90 degrees that you get a wider view, much better picture in large view. But you are missing out the nasopharynx. That is the only disadvantage with this. And then secondly, there are group of patients, maybe 5%, 10%, who are not able to control their gag reflex. So there it's not feasible. There is a definitely absolute indication that go for fiber optic examination. The other advantage is I already told you, patient is much more comfortable. I was doing both the things. But to get a picture when I want to show for a presentation, I prefer 90 degree. But because you get a much bigger picture, it's very easy to delineate each and every finding. The clarity is much more. But with the fiber optic disadvantage there, the gag reflex can be taken care of.
Yes, Satish, see what is happening is now you have said you must do an endoscopy. I have said you must do an endoscopy. You must rule out everything. But a lot of people are worried today's time. Quite a few questions have come in. Are you still doing the endoscopies in this COVID times, or are you just abandoning them and looking at it? Koi nahi will do it later on. Or what has been your attitude or what advice to everybody?
This time is definitely a difficult time. This is a very, very valid question of present times. I usually try to avoid doing endoscopy and take the help of instead CT scan and X-rays. But if there is a definite history that patient is not having any symptoms in relation to COVID, and then there's their patient has a pressing problem that patient cannot afford CT scan. Endoscopy is my office procedure. It's free of cost. So then definitely with all the precautions, like you have a frame and then you have a sheet, you have to protect yourself. You wear the head shield also with proper precautions. But definitely my endoscopy number, if it was 20 per day, it has come to 3 per day. So definitely you have to take precautions.
So there is the advice over there is, if it is a must, do it, but don't become a hero. Yes. You know, when you're traveling by aircraft, they make an announcement. I don't know how many of you listen to the announcement that the air hostess makes. In case of a fall in cabin pressure, the oxygen mask will drop from above. Before using the oxygen mask on a dependent person, first put the oxygen mask on yourself and then use it on the child. What they mean to say is, look after yourself first. Only if you are able to look after yourself and you are healthy, only then you will be able to look after the other people. So you have to be safe in these conditions. Do follow all the precautions which are being given repeatedly by the various organizations. Even our Federation of the Head and Neck Oncology is given, the British is given, the American Association is giving, even our Indian associations are giving you many ways of how to go about opening the OPDs, opening the OTs, doing the endoscopies. So do follow and be safe. Satish, you mentioned something about tumor, hematoma, abscess, cystic edema. Somebody wants to wants you to repeat on this THACO. What was this issue? And
THACO is an acronym, I think, which I learned from you only, sir.
Yes,
this
sir.
is a T stands for tumor. Once you have a widening in the prevertebral soft tissue on an X-ray cervical spine, a simple X-ray gives you a lot of information. This is what I wanted to convey. So if you have a widening more than 3/4 of the width of the C6 vertebra, then that is considered as a positive sign. That means there is a definite widening of prevertebral soft tissue shadow. So this could be secondary to T stands for tumor. Any hypopharyngeal tumor can give you a widening. Post-Kircher tumor can give you a widening. Then H stands for hematoma, post-injury. And then patients who are coagulant, maybe a violent movement of the neck can cause a hematoma. The A stands for abscess formation. Most common abscess in this region is a retropharyngeal abscess coming down, usually from a tuberculosis involving the cervical spine. And then you stand C for cyst, any cystic lesion, aneurysm, bone cyst, they are common. Then edema. Edema can occur because of a lymphadenitis itself. You have a retropharyngeal lymphadenitis, which is very common, especially in smaller age group of the children, getting infection, tonsillitis, adenoiditis, retropharyngeal lymphadenitis, and edema. So that can present in the form of, again, widening of the prevertebral soft tissue.
So this, some questions are coming in on the role of proton pump inhibitors. Now, what they're asking is, how long do you think proton pump inhibitors should be given, and the exact role of the proton pump inhibitors?
We can give continuously for 6 months together without any side effect. But remember, this is nothing like as it used to be considered initially. There is no side effect. There are patients who got a renal damage because of omeprazole long term. So be cautious. Ask the patient's history, renal liver disorder, and get the testing done in between. Maybe once you get it, first time you start, and then after 6 weeks, and make the patient educative, make the patient alert. These are the warning signal. If you get it, stop the drug and come back to me. There's nothing like no side effect with this drug, but this can be given safely. Rather, if you take the history back, when I was an intern, there used to be lined up cases for vagotomies, selective vagotomy, truncal vagotomy, highly selective vagotomy. And with one molecule, omeprazole, once it was invented, it was discovered, all the vagotomies vanished. So no vagotomy is done now. So this is what a chemotherapy, a wonderful chemotherapeutic agent. So thanks to those scientists who discovered it.
So this, pardon my ignorance, in somewhere down the line, you had said that while doing this swallow study, try to hold the barium at the cricopharynx level. Did I understand that correct?
Yes, that's very true.
So my ignorance over there comes over a little bit. How do I hold it up at the cricopharynx level? Because, somewhere what happens is that it could be once it passes my oropharynx, the swallowing reflex becomes a reflex, this thing. So is it actually hold up, or do I have to put a swallow thing over there so that it slows it down? I have to hold my swallow.
That is why I tell you, but it's a difficult thing to do, but only few patients can do it. The idea is, the aim is so that you can definitely delineate both piriform forces clearly. If you hold up, then only you can see. Otherwise, it will just follow a fraction of a second, it goes down. And then you have it's very difficult to see.
Yeah. So another thing which some of them are asking is about the antidepressant and amitriptyline and serotonin. Do they have any role to play?
Definite role. All these patients, they have a serotonin disturbances. So amitriptyline, you should know the contraindication of drug. One of the contraindication of amitriptyline is glaucoma. So always ask the patient, is he suffering from this, or is he on another sedative he's on anti-seizures treatment, because this will add to, he is on gabapentin. So this will add to the synergistic effect of side effects, rather not effect, side effect of the drug. So patient will be drowsy and you get a phone call, oh, patient is drowsy after taking your medicine. So take a preemptive step. You ask the patient first and then prescribe. There is a definite role of clonazepam also. It all depends on how you see the patient. If patient needs, there is sleep disturbance, better to use clonazepam. If the patient gives more features of depression, then better to use amitriptyline. Then you can use other anxiolytic drugs, but these drugs have a habit formation. This also is a word of caution. That way clonazepam is better than alprazolam. This way, this is a better drug. Less of a addiction.
And to add to the PPI mystery, at times one does look at it, okay, I'm giving PPI, but I'm not getting too much of relief. There's one condition which is known as ectopic mucosa. The gastric mucosa tends to get displaced into the esophagus, get destroyed into the esophagus. So there's sort of a herniation of the gastric mucosa above, and that tends to secrete out more acid over there. So this ectopic mucosa over there, which is the displaced gastric mucosa, now this at times causes the characteristic symptoms are the same as that of GARD, but the mechanism of ectopic gastric mucosa is not the same as GARD. So over here they have tried the road of radiofrequency ablations, which would bring about a significant improvement in the outcome of the patient, because this helps to give us a controlled charge which is there of energy, and that destroys the unhealthy tissue, whereas minimizing the side effects. Now,
just a line about this.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me. I missed out on this. This is called as heterotropic gastric mucosa, and if it is present in the upper end of the esophagus, it is more carcinogenic. You can have a white patches also. The radiofrequency lasers, even the carbon dioxide laser, they are very helpful. It's very rightly pointed out. Thank you, Dr. Achal.
Yeah. Then let us see what more questions we have. Oh, we have a huge line list of questions. Satish, you're going to be here till 12 o'clock at night.
Oh my God. I had the same experience while presenting for Vertigo, and I had 1,600 delegates, and I just requested at the end that you mail me, I will reply.
1,600 delegates would give me vertigo at the end of the vertigo lecture over there.
Very, very true.
So, thin barium swallow. Now, if I have to give you an option of choosing a investigation which would best suit, what advice would you have for everybody? Cost effectiveness, diagnostic, and the effectiveness of bringing about a correct diagnosis. If I ask you to give you an option, what do you think you would like to suggest?
My only investigation is a fiber optic endoscopic examination. That is a sure shot. If it does not have this facility, then you have to think in the form of a X-ray cervical spine associated with ultrasound neck. That's all. Yeah,
because one has to realize a couple of more things. Barium swallow in the upper esophagus, in the region of the cricopharynx, is not a very good investigation, because you have so many other folds and ruby and mucosa over there that it may be difficult for you to read it. And even the fluoroscopy, what you do over there, may not be very effective in diagnosing the problem what we are wanting to look over here. So apart from this, we have other situations, skeletal muscular disorder like myasthenia gravis, then myotonia, autoimmune myositis, and other mass lesions, etc., which could cause compression, which could cause a similar type of a problem. Then we have a lot of discussion upon clonazepam, transnasal esophagoscopy, and the role of the esophageal manometry. Would you like to take that one, Satish?
Yes. Transnasal esophagoscopy, if you have, that's a wonderful instrument. One endoscopy and you have a knowledge right from the tip of the nose down to the level of the stomach. There's no substitute to that. But if you have that, that is a wonderful thing to have. But everybody does not have. So what I have at my center is a fiber optic laryngoscope and hypopharyngoscope. I don't have transnasal esophagoscope. I although intend to buy now. So I always work with the help of a gastroenterologist. If I find a signs there in the upper part, it's good. If I don't find and the patient comes back with the same symptom, then definitely I send the patient for fiber optic esoscopy. So patient undergoes 2 procedures since we don't have the facility.
Satish, do you have a choice of PPI? Which PPI do you think is the best?
I usually prefer omeprazole for a different reason, because it's very cheap and convenient. Rabiprazole is slightly more costly, but depends upon if the patient says, okay, I'm not getting relief, definitely you can change it to rabiprazole. And then if the patient has associated constipation, you can add levosulfide, or you can have etopride, IT.
There's one question which is coming in with a reference on Scott Brown 8th edition claims antacids to be the first line of treatment for LPRD/mild LPRD, and antihistaminics and PPIs are considered as second line of management. In fact, PPIs are claimed to be as good as a placebo only in LPRD. Koi comment is ऊपर?
If you think what is LPI, laryngopharyngeal reflux,
yeah,
and most common cause is a gastroesophageal reflux disorder. The underlying cause has to be that. So that is what I said a line while I was mentioning antacid has a definite role in acute symptomatology. And if the patient has a very short history, give the antacid, patient is fine, does not come back with the symptoms, no problem. But if you have a persistent symptoms at a pretty long time, then that means the mucosa is already damaged. Antacid is just neutralizing the acid. It does not let the mucosa heal. It is only the PPI which will act at that level, at the cellular level, and then let the mucosa heal. So healing will not occur. So it all depends upon, first line is okay, but read the line particularly. It is also mentioned for a acute presentation and short duration. That's also mentioned in the Scott Brown.
And would you like to combine domperidone at any point of time with your proton pump inhibitors?
Depends upon the patient's history, because if the patient says, okay, I eat food and it stays here and I get already belching out and sensation of fullness in the chest part, definitely you combine it with domperidone. It's better to start with one drug and then add on second drug, rather than taking first drug, initially 2 drugs, then you don't know whether which drug is acting. So you're unnecessarily exposing the patient to 2 drugs. So combination is, I personally don't prefer. I prefer one drug.
Another question is coming out on the role of allergy. Do you think allergy has a role over here to play?
Yeah, definitely.
So what do you want to do for that?
You have a angioedema, which can be at the level of uvula, which can be at the level of tongue, lips, oropharynx, laryngopharynx. Laryngeal edema is known. Similarly, hypopharyngeal edema is also known, because the area is so wide and not accessible to examination, and we are not able to see it. That is why documentation is poor. But this same pathogenesis can happen down there also. That is why I said simple CBC, we are getting it done. So eosinophil count, what is the number? 0 to 6 is the normal number. If you have more than 6, that means there is an underlying allergic pathology. So you definitely combine anti-allergic in such patients along with the PPI if the patient has a history of GERD.
And there's something coming about sinusitis along with this as a part and parcel of the GERD. Would you like to take it in this particular topic? Is it related with this thing, or it's totally a different thing?
There are many theories that GERD is causing sinusitis. But as far as my personal experience, clinical experience is concerned, I find sinusitis is as more of a separate entity. Very less contribution can be, because if the patient has such a severe GERD, he says, I lie down and the acid comes out through my mouth and the nose, then there is a definite. History is suggestive. Otherwise, sinusitis is to be taken as a separate entity.
Yeah. So I think that most of the questions have been covered by these things. Satish, would you like to give a closing message before I ask Prahlad? I would like to ask Prahlad first. Prahlad, do you have any comments to offer over here?
No, sir. I think, sir, Dr. Satish has covered it very nicely, and you have whatever remaining, you have addressed it very well. So I don't think I have to make any comment on this. Yeah.
Thank you, Prahlad. You've been a very, very clever person by just slipping out of everybody's hands by saying, you've done it very well. Satish, would you like to give a closing message before I wind up the whole thing?
Same take-home message is consider every patient as a patient of tumor, so that you don't miss out a single patient of organic lesion.
So before we wind up, I would just like to summarize the whole topic in a small way, that what Dr. Satish has just now dealt with, Globus, It is basically a non-painful sensation or a painful sensation, a tightness, a lump, a foreign body sensation in the throat, not associated with dysphagia, which may actually improve with meals. And it is a fairly common thing with more than, I think, 20%, 30% people suffering from it at least once in a lifetime. There is an anxiety which is related over here. It's most commonly would be the GRD as a factor over here. And one must not trivialize the situation, because if we need to miss out something, we are going to end up in a problem. So we must rule out other disease processes which are going along with that. So I would also like to add a couple of take-home points, that globus sensation is different from dysphagia. Dysphagia is difficulty in swallowing. Globus is a lump in the throat or a sense of a lump in the throat. Globus has a benign course with no long-term consequences. So be careful, be very rest assured on that. It actually has no long-term consequences, but the tension factor is quite high as far as the individuals are concerned and the patients are concerned. But with the management in the proper manner, the overall prognosis is good. The magnitude of the symptoms may decline over a period of time. So a bit of therapy over there, a psychotherapy over there, antidepressants, along with the lifestyle management things, does make a lot of difference in the management. The cause and relationship for the globus are difficult to establish at times, but they must be tried to be established so that you don't miss out anything. Trial of the acid suppressive treatment over here is a reasonable approach, and only in case the symptoms don't settle down, the red flags must be identified and you must rule out malignancy. The management of idiopathic globus consists of basically reassurance, conservative management, neuromodulators, and the complementary approach which goes along with that. So I think we have covered most of the things in this 1 hour period. I thank Dr. Satish Mehta for his, yes, Satish, I'm sorry.
Yes. One last thing I forgot is a vagal palsy. They can also present as a globus patient because there's a loss of spiral laryngeal nerve, recurrent laryngeal nerve, both. And then muscles, they are supplying the constrictor muscle as well. We are only remembering the vocal cord part. They are supplying true cord, then false cord. They are supplying the pharyngeal musculature as well. So these patients do complain of globus feeling at times. So this must be remembered. This also is one of the things which can be remembered.
Yes, very, very nice, Satish. So we wind up this program. I thank Satish for such a comprehensive presentation. I tried my level best to corner him with so many questions which everybody had asked. But believe me, he's as slippery as an eel and as intelligent as a shark, that he managed to solve every answer, every question over there, what everybody answered. I also see just next to Satish on the screen, Kabir looking very pensive over there. Hi Kabir, nice to see you after a long time. So with this, I thank all the participants who were there. I think there were more than 145 participants, which was a very nice attendance considering that we have a lot of webinars overlapping at this time. I think if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Satish Mehta has another webinar going on in his house with his wife as an expert on the other one, and Prahlad also moderating somewhere else. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for a lovely discussion, asking so many questions. And thank you, Satish, for getting away with everything. That is what was expected of you. Thank you, Prahlad. Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
have a very nice evening. Have a pleasant day.
We had participants from 18 different countries, from Australia up to UK.
Oh, that's great.
Fantastic representation today, and wonderful talk and wonderful moderation, sir. And I know Achal sir is very busy with a lot of administrative activities, but he should be on this channel quite frequently and moderate some more important programs, sir. I look forward to have you again with us soon, sir. Thank you, both of you.
Always
Wonderful.
ready to be with you. You know, Delhi police may not be a very good police force as far as public is concerned, but they have a very nice motto: with you, for you, always, Prahlad.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, and I need one more permission. Can I post this on YouTube?
Because sure.
You are the boss.
People who are missed, they can view on the YouTube.
You are the boss.
I'm thankful to Prahlad because he made me meet Achal sir also, and then this is a wonderful meeting. And Prahlad, I really appreciate your efforts, sincere efforts.
I had one more object in my mind. I wanted different generations of PG alumni to meet here. A senior generation and junior generation who have not met each other. That was my another objective to start this particular series of programs. And I hope now we have had 6 programs and some more are lined up. I hope I will be able to include all the alumni in future. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you both of you.
Thank you. Thank
A
you.
really great honor to have both of you here. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.